From Olympic City and the home of Pikes Peak, this is the Automotive ADHD Show. Oh yeah, here we are rocking it on the Automotive ADHD Show, heard on the radio in Southern Colorado and around the world as a podcast. Matt West here, hanging out with you to talk about cars. You have, of course, tuned into the correct car show. And now today's show is going to be a little different than usual. I'm going to be running a best of for today's show. I know, there's the collective groan of disappointment, but I selected some amazing clips for you from the past couple of months, some really good interviews, some fun stuff. And reason being is, I know the reason being is kind of lame. I'm not sick, nothing like that. Nope, I didn't drive off a cliff. Only reason being is this week has been absolutely killer with work. And so for me, I haven't had time to sit down and prep a good show for you. So I figured this is honestly a better option than just going off the cuff and giving you a half-baked show. No one wants to hear that, so I want to make sure I deliver to you the sort of quality that I always promise to you. Of course, the sort of quality in the most mediocre car show on the internet, but that's okay. You know, we have standards. We have standards around here. So anyway, I do have some really fun stuff too in the works I want to let you know about before we get to some great interview segments here. Of course, we're going to hear from Jimmy Ford. We're going to hear from Alastair Moffatt, and we're also going to talk gasoline. And should you really care about Octane? Yeah, longtime listeners of the show might recognize these segments, but of course, I have seen an uptick in listenership recently. I have some new listeners, and you may be unfamiliar with this stuff. There is some fantastic car-related things in the vault, in the archives for this show. So I'm excited to play that for you. Before I do, though, again, I'm going to be doing some fun stuff. Next weekend, I'm going to be broadcasting live from the High Altitude Horsepower Car Show. That's going to be up in Westcliff, Colorado. Going to have the show out there. That's a lot of fun, doing that for the radio show, which is heard in that part of the state. And then I'm also working to get a very cool guest. I'm not going to announce his name yet. I don't have everything locked down, but we are in talks of getting him on. He's producing a documentary about American Motor Corporation Company, whatever you will with that. AMC, the best car company in the world. So I am hopefully going to be booking my guest here shortly, and I'll be able to give you that interview right here. It's going to be a lot of fun. There's a lot of great reasons why you tune into this car show. So anyway, without further ado, let me roll into this clip right here. Let's go for it. I'm going to get even more philosophical about gasoline. Yes, one of my favorite things, the magical liquid that makes things burn and makes cars run and makes burnouts happen. It's all good stuff. And I recently ran into a gas station ad, and I had to stop and record it. It was for a major gasoline retailer, one you're probably familiar with. And it was so flagrantly wrong about how gasoline works and how octane works. And look, I don't get easily triggered, right? You know, they say, when people talk about the so-called Karens of the world getting triggered by nonsensical things, that's not me. Except when it involves gasoline, because yeah, I'm hyped up about this, because I'm just gonna have to play you this ad. Now I'll play the ad here, and I will censor the company's name for their privacy and protection. So here you go. Take a listen to this. It's an excerpt from the ad. Listen to this.
Do you want the best for your car? Then fill up with premium at Circle K. Circle K Premium is our best fuel with double the cleaning detergent, protecting your engine from corrosion and damage so it can work at its best. And that, my friend, increases your mileage for more cha-ching in your pocket.
Yeah, okay, there we go. That's enough of that. And again, the company's name has been censored to protect their privacy in this matter. Yes. Anyway, so yeah, look. Okay, it couldn't be more wrong. Okay, and here's why. Because firstly, but actually, before I get into that, you know, they are in the business of selling fuel, and a lot of other people are also in the business of selling fuel. So I understand that their marketing team was probably tasked with this, like, how do we sell more premium fuel that costs more? But it couldn't be that statement there that the premium is the best gasoline couldn't be further from the truth. And sure, it might have detergents in it. That's fine. That's not false advertising. But saying that is the best gasoline is a bit of a reach. And also the very end statement where they say it equals more ka-ching in your pocket. I'm sorry, but have you ever tried to buy premium gas? I mean, I do all the time for reasons which we will get into, but it's more expensive. There's less ka-ching in your pocket, substantially less. So, okay, so let's break this down into octane. So when they talk about premium gasoline, premium is referring to the octane rating. You have regular, mid-grade, and premium. And if you live in a southern state, you might even know it as high-test fuel. But regardless, premium, high octane, and high-grade fuel are all synonymous. They're all the same. And so what that is, though, is octane. This breaks down to what octane is. And octane is merely a measurement. We won't get into the nitty-gritty of actually how octane is measured and what specifically, what variables are measured in it. But basically, and defined by the ever-correct Wikipedia, and actually this is correct. This is one instance where Wikipedia has this right. It's a good way to describe it, though, is, quote, an octane rating or octane number is a standard measure of a fuel's ability to withstand compression in an internal combustion engine without detonating. So, what you have to understand is, and this is correct even for Wikipedia. And remember, never cite Wikipedia on your essays, but you can do it on your podcasts, so and radio shows, which is fine. But you have to understand this. There are two fundamental things, which is compression and detonation. And compression is something that happens in an internal combustion engine, and you don't even need to know the details of the different strokes of that said engine. You just need to know that piston travels up and down in its bore, and when it gets to the top, the spark plug, so it squeezes all that air, the air and fuel is mixed in, and the piston goes up and squeezes that into a really volatile mixture, which is compressed. When it's compressed, it will combust with greater efficiency and greater force and greater power. That spark plug lights that combustion mixture and then sends the piston back down, and that piston ultimately connects to your crankshaft, which turns into rotational energy, which through your transmission directly goes to your wheels. It's cool that you're burning something and turning it into rotational force and driving with it. That is honestly, from an engineering standpoint, that's fascinating in my opinion. We come to know that as common stuff these days, but still, it's pretty cool when you think about it. Now, what happens with detonation? Detonation is not the same thing as combustion. You have compression, compressing the air and fuel, and then combusting that, and there's a very controlled flame front, an explosion, but explosion is not quite the right term. But that flame front that kind of expands and pushes that piston down is very controlled, and it's designed to be that way. Well, what happens is detonation with poor quality fuels can occur. And what it does is, if, say, that piston is already at the bottom, the very, very bottom of its travel, and you still have fuel and air in the cylinder, like if it's, actually taking that air and fuel in and the piston's going down before it goes back up. Well, if that fuel explodes at the wrong point in the cycle of the engine, when the piston is, say, at the bottom of its travel, well, that force is now causing that piston to go down further than it can go down. There's no more down than the bottom. That is the bottom. And when an uncontrolled explosion happens inside that chamber, not initiated by the spark plug, that fuel and that explosion is pushing the piston down in a way that it is not designed to do. And in the worst case scenario, this can actually break connecting rods, break, even entire crankshafts. It can, more or less, what it tends to do is it damages the surface of the piston, and also it can damage valves and where the valves seal. Point is, detonation, also sometimes called ping or knock, is really bad. You don't want it. It will irreparably damage your engine. You will need a new engine. So you don't want that. Now, octane, as per that definition, is a fuel's ability to withstand compression without detonating, because all the heat and stuff in an engine, if a fuel doesn't have a high enough octane rating, as that piston's coming up, just the heat from the combustion that happened before, and even the heat caused by the actual compressing of the gas, that can cause it to spontaneously combust if it's a poor quality or low octane fuel. So that kind of gives you a little bit of insight into what octane is. Higher octane, the higher the numerical value, so say you have 85, 87, and 91, the higher the numerical value is the higher the resistance that fuel has to detonating. And again, in a performance application, you want the highest resistance possible. That's why race cars run, 100 octane, 110 octane fuel that you can't even get at the gas pump. But for your street car, you can still run into detonation, pre-detonation as it's also called, ping, knock. Again, those are all interchangeable terms. You can still run into that if you put the wrong fuel in your normal daily driver. Here's the thing, though. That high-octane fuel is not what's making more power. One other thing to understand with this is you have the compression that occurs that I just explained how that works. Well, there's also the compression ratio, which is basically how far that piston is squeezing that stuff. Is it squeezing it a lot? Is it squeezing it a little bit? And if it's squeezing it a lot, it's going to have a higher numerical value to the compression ratio. Compression ratios are usually defined by, 8.7 to 1, 10 to 1, and that's how much volumetric amount of air is being squeezed down into a smaller quantity of that same thing. Or it's the same quantity, but it's being squeezed into a tighter space, rather. That's a better way to put it. And now, that said, a higher compression engine is capable of making more power with that greater compression. But the higher you raise the compression ratio, the more the fuel will want to experience detonation. So you need a higher octane rating to prevent the fuel from detonating in a higher compression engine. It's not actually the fuel that gives you more power. That's a misconception that, you put the high test fuel in your car and it gives you more power. No, it does allow you to make more power with an engine designed to make more power. The fuel is just allowing you to run a higher compression ratio. It's not the fuel itself that's making more power necessarily. So here's the thing. Long story short, higher octane is higher resistance to detonation, lower octane, lower resistance to detonation, which is suitable for a lower compression ratio. Now, the thing is, higher octane is completely meaningless if you put it in a low compression engine that doesn't require high octane fuel. Like I said, the fuel itself is not what the octane itself, rather, is not what's causing you to have more power. It's having a higher compression engine and being able to safely run it with that higher octane fuel. So by putting, say if your car requires 85 octane fuel and you put 91 in it, it's meaningless. You don't get any benefit from that high octane because the lower octane fuel would resist any chance of detonation that could happen in that car anyway. So there's no benefit in doing it. It's basically a waste of money. Now, the question then is, well, how do I know what octane my car needs? And that's pretty easy. You look in your owner's manual. And now when you build an engine yourself, you need to, which I did on $800 stroker Jeep, I changed the compression ratio, I changed the rod ratio, I changed all sorts of really complicated and annoying things. And as a result, I actually have to run premium 91 octane in a Jeep, which is very weird, but also not many Jeeps are making like 350 pound-feet of torque. But that said, no, I did all that stuff. You don't need to do that. As a casual driver, guess what? The auto manufacturer, they have well-trained engineers who worked hard to calculate that for you, and they put that in the owner's manual, and the manual just say, this car requires 85 octane, 87, or 91. It's easy as that. And here, I'll actually look at my AE86 owner's manual here, and get this right here on. I gotta open it up here. It's kind of crusty. It's like a 40-year-old owner's manual. Right here on page 2. Check this out. It says your vehicle must be used only with unleaded fuel, 91 octane or higher. There you go. And that's because the AE86 had a higher compression ratio in some cases, and now, in my case as well, depending on which engine you have, I don't even have the stock engine in my car. It's not the engine that came with it. So this literally doesn't matter. But if you have a stock car, stock drivetrain, look in your owner's manual. Easy stuff right there. And then, that's one of those cool things. Also, I noticed in the owner's manual here was something else kind of funny on the gasoline page. Page 2, it also says gasohol, or a mixture of unleaded gasoline and 10% ethanol is sometimes available in areas, and please take the following procedures when running this. Well, nowadays, we just call that E10. Like, we don't call that anything fancy, but that had just come out when this owner's manual was printed, and they decided to call it it's a gasoline ethanol mix. They decided to call it gasohol. I just thought that was an interesting note. We should start calling it gasohol. Try calling it that at the gas station, and no one will know what you're talking about. But anyway, so moral of the story, if you put 91 octane in a car that takes 85, essentially nothing will happen, except a waste of your money. Conversely, 85 octane in a 91 car, a car that requires 91 octane, can actually cause irreparable physical damage in some cases. So don't do that. And now you know about Octane, and you can annoy your friends with all this newly found knowledge and know that you won't be overpaying for gas that you really don't need.
Did you know there's a rare but serious condition affecting 1 out of every million? Most are born with it, and despite decades of research, doctors struggle to find a cure. The truth is, thousands of people simply don't know what cars are. For those affected, things are grim, but recent developments show promising success. New clinical trials using breakthrough audio technology have shown a 69% improvement in patients with the most severe symptoms. Treatments vary, but one day we may see a cure. More information is available at throttlewarrior.com.
Those car sounds are courtesy of my next guest. That is his Pikes Peak hill climb race car. Goes by the name Bronxzilla, by the way. You can definitely hear why. Now, his name is Jimmy Ford. You can find him at jimmyfordracing.com. He was just there at the Pikes Peak International Hill Climb this summer. Now, Jimmy, welcome back to Automotive ADHD.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate you having me on here again.
Yeah, I'm super stoked to have you on, especially after what was a crazy, crazy race week. I mean, everything leading up to the race was absolutely intense all the time. Everyone was super busy. And then the race itself, I think anyone listening to this now knows that the conditions during race day definitely sucked. I think that's the best way to put it. It was not warm, to say the least.
Yeah, no, it was pretty intense up there. I mean, when we got up there at about 2:00 in the morning and it was super cold, we were just like, oh, what do we expect today,
Right. And that's one of those things that's Colorado for you. It's the end of June, that you're racing in, and there's snow on the mountain there. And for me, I kind of recounted my story of how everything went to my listeners earlier on the show. But I mean, it was just darn cold. I was at Devil's Playground, and it was, and I think, what are we at? Like 13,000 feet at that point. It's a little before the summit, and I get up there at 4:30 in the morning after being in a traffic jam all the way up the mountain all night, and there was snow on the ground. And it's like, wow, I haven't seen snow for a whopping month here in Colorado. We had just had snow in May, but even then, it was cold. So now, one important question, though, before we talk a little bit about your experience on the mountain was, does Bronxzilla have windshield wipers?
So we did put a windshield wiper on it before Pikes Peak because you never can expect what the weather's going to do. So, yeah, we did put one on there.
Awesome. At least one, right? Not two, but one wiper.
Yeah, and it was like a 60-degree sweep. So, like the old school buses, that's where the windshield wiper came from, was the back of a Subaru. So we just took it out of the junkyard, threw it on the Bronco real quick, and said, "Hey, just in case,
I love that. That's awesome. Yeah, what's crazy too is I was watching after the race as well. I was watching some in-car footage from a number of drivers, and especially the guys running like the open cars, open wheel stuff that has like no windshield, no nothing. There were dudes, literally taking like a microfiber towel, like a rag, and wiping their visors on their helmets every like 3 or 4 seconds. That you are the windshield wiper there. So at least you had that going for you.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine doing both at the same time,
Yeah, exactly. And I think even one of the guys running the in one of the Teslas, he was having trouble with the touchscreen in the Tesla, and because he couldn't get to the defroster controls because it's all in a touchscreen. Which, I mean, that's again, at least on an old school car, you kind of have things old school in that sense, as in the fact that they work.
Yeah, exactly. When we're wearing gloves inside of there, it's kind of hard to work a touchscreen. But the old school stuff where you flip a switch, that's good old handy, good technology there.
Exactly. Exactly. So lots of crazy stuff on race day. I mean, there was rain, there was fog, there was mechanical, issues, all sorts of stuff. But before we talk about that, how have things been for you coming off of race week? Have you at least had a chance to kind of rest and recover from it?
Yeah, we took the very next weekend off, went camping, kind of had some time to come back to our senses and everything, because it gets a little tough sometimes during race week. with the early mornings and late nights and stuff. So it was kind of nice to be able to cool down. And we ended up, after the race, I couldn't sleep, so I went and took the motor apart a little bit, not too much, but yeah. Then I was like, okay, just need some time off.
Yeah, there you go. I had to take a day to just kind of sleep in myself too, and I wasn't even racing. I was just trying to be there to watch it. So it was definitely crazy in that regard. And of course, coming off of race week, and then the week after that, you got 4th of July weekend, so that's always a perfect time to take a break, watch some fireworks, have some cold drinks, you could say. So anyway, now earlier, I was talking too on the show here, about some of the rain and all those conditions. And so how was that when you were getting ready for the race, like Saturday night? I know they were, saying rain's in the forecast, don't know what to expect. How did you have to prepare for that the night before? Was there anything else you did?
Well, yeah, I didn't really know what the mountain was going to look like. With rain up there, sometimes there could be fog or, different scenarios, and you just have to try and play them all out the night before and get as much rest as you can, which was about 5 or 6 hours of sleep. Get up at midnight, go back up there, and see what the mountain has to bring, and then you can kind of address your strategy from there. Which is, I felt like it worked pretty good for us. As far as one thing, we didn't ever get a test on rain tires, which would have been nice too. Not that it would have mattered with the engine blowing, but it would have been nice to just feel it out. But it ended up working out for us okay.
Awesome. Yeah, and I was hearing too from some other drivers that one challenge with the race tires was that it was wet at the bottom of the hill. It was dry at the middle of the hill, and then it was wet at the top again. So then you run into a problem where your tires don't really work well for the whole race because they're not going to, the rain tires obviously aren't going to grip the same way on that dry section that they would. So you kind of just sort of have to pick a tire and just deal with it.
Yeah, that was one of the things when we left the start line. It got a little loose, and it was a little loose until you started coming out of the fog, and then it seemed like it was starting to come around a little bit, but right then it was like, oh, we're done.
Yeah. So, and let's talk about that a little bit, because you did have mechanical problems on top of all of this crazy fog, the terrible cold weather, and the slick conditions. Because, one thing too, it wasn't even just slick. It was that the visibility was bad. But you had some issues with the engine coming up. I think it was in the first section. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was just after we got through the picnic grounds. I started feeling like we were coming down on power a little bit, and which is usual for going up the mountain, but not as much as we were losing. And I just remember coming into a corner, heard a little bit of weird sounds coming out of the engine. That I got out of the corner, and I was in the gas pretty hard, and next thing you know, it was like that was it.
Oh man. And your heart's gotta sink right there too, I imagine. Like as soon as that's on our main run, we've been, that's that, like you get practice all week and you get a bunch of runs with that, but it's on that race day, that one run that counts. There's not really any reruns, typically speaking.
Exactly. And that's what I kind of felt like is when that happened, I knew exactly what it was. I knew we had lost the engine, and I just 8 months of preparation flashes before your eyes, but what do? You just got to keep moving forward. So
exactly. And the fact is you got to be up there on the mountain. You got to race anyway, one way or another, it's still got to be up there and, be a part of that, even if the engine goes. And you look at guys, even like they had the Hoonigan had their car out, that pink Porsche, the Pegasus one. They blew up the car during practice, during qualifying, So, that's one of those things with the mechanical stuff that no matter how big you are, like once you have that run, even if you're the, biggest factory funded team and you've got 10 spare engines sitting in your trailer at the pits, if you blow it if the engine goes during your main run, that's still it,
Yeah, exactly. You only get one run on race day, and that's it. And so that's part of the challenge of the mountain that it brings to you, is you get one shot at it. If you mess anything up, or if you have any mechanical failures, you don't get another shot. So
right.
That's really cool.
Right. And and for the sake of my listeners, remind them again to kind of what your engine setup is like. You've got kind of a, fairly custom, fairly specialized engine for your application here. What's the setup again like?
Yeah, so this is like a engine that was built back in 1994. It was built by Leonard Vachel. It's kind of a Windsor block with a Cleveland style head. It has canted valves, and it makes about 14-to-1 compression. We run it on alcohol. I mean, it had titanium connecting rods. It had a steel forged crank. So the thing was a pretty nice piece, really. It made about 630 to 650 horsepower on the dyno, so it wasn't no slag.
Right. And so, what you said you ended up going later that night, after racing, tearing into the engine a little bit. What did you ultimately find too? I'm just curious to know what broke inside there.
Yeah, so we lost a number 2 rod bearing, and from there it just overheated the rod. And with those being titanium rods, I don't know if maybe the life was a little bit out on them or what, but it ended up breaking the rod, and then from there it was just detrimental.
Oh, is it total carnage?
Yeah, I mean, we might be able to save the heads. I don't know. I'm going to send them down to Rocky Mountain Machine and see if he can test them and see if they're still good. I know some of the pistons slapped the valves and stuff, because once that rod broke, the piston came up, hit the valve, and then on Ford engines they have a pin at the front of the camshaft that it drives off of. So it sheared that pin off, because I think it put too much pressure when that piston came up and hit the valve.
Yeah.
But then it sheared that, and then the camshaft wouldn't turn. Then the crank was still turning, and it hit all the rest of the valves. So I'm sure a lot of valves are bent. There's a lot of push rods that were bent. So
yeah, and I initially I'd seen you posted on Instagram. Earlier too. I remember seeing you post something of just you were turning the crank and the valve train wasn't turning. And I'm like, I'm hoping just maybe the cam gear, went, or something simple like that. But it sounds like it's a little worse than that.
Yeah, it was a little bit. And so then when the rod broke, it came up and slapped the camshaft, and the camshaft is junk. So I'm hoping we might be able to save the heads. Other than that, everything's pretty much junk.
Oh man. Well, yeah, at least those heads though, because those sound like they were, kind of, purpose built for that application, not an off the shelf part. Whereas at least you can go get a Windsor block and some other stuff and a new crank and things. Those heads sound like kind of that those were, kind of specialized for that.
Yeah, there's only 2 of that head that are in existence, and luckily I think we saved them, but we'll have to see.
Oh man, well I got my fingers crossed that those are salvageable. So that ties into another question I have then. So what's the plan for building back and doing next year? I know you're already going to be racing in Grand Junction. You told me before the show you're going to be racing there. But what's the plan for Bronxzilla, especially like Pikes Peak 2023? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I'd love to run Pikes Peak again. I mean, I'm one of those people that's super competitive, and it's hard to leave somewhere on a DNF. If we would have made it up to the top or not finished, well, at least we would have finished. But not making it to the top, that's just like, we got to do it again. Can't leave off on a DNF. So I think we're going to put something else together for next year. We'll just have to see how it plays out.
For sure. And are you thinking of any other plans too for Bronxzilla specifically? I know a lot of people are really loving that car. I mean, especially when we were out at the Fan Fest, you were revving that. People were having a great time with it. I even was watching a video of it was on Randy Popst. It was his like post race breakdown. He did a little video, and what's funny is he's in his video, he's trying to talk at the beginning of the video, and then you hear this insanely loud V8 next to him start up somewhere else in the pits, and he kind of stops to look over at it. I'm like, I know that was you. I guarantee that was you. Rev bombing Randy Popst there. Maybe inadvertently, but rev bombing him all the same.
Yeah, I think he was pitted right across from us, so definitely.
I was like, I recognize that engine after hearing it at the Fan Fest. I recognize that. So
we're just letting everybody know we were there, and it was time to wake up. That's about it.
Yep. That's what an alarm clock right there, right? When I was on the top up at Devil's Playground, I managed to get up there and get like a couple of hours of sleep in my truck, and just sleeping in the driver's seat. And I knew the racing had started because I heard race cars. That's what woke me up. It wasn't the fact that, you know, it was lighter outside now. No, it was it's the race cars.
Yeah, exactly. What better of an alarm clock than to have race cars waking you up? That's where it's at.
Oh, yeah, I love that. So now going into, all right, the idea of running next year or, you know, even just doing more hill climb stuff with Bronxzilla until then, is there anything you would change about your setup now, knowing that you've got essentially another year to prep for this now? Is there anything you would do a little differently with it?
Yeah, I think we're going to stiffen it up some more. I mean, it was hard. We were kind of stuck with what we had coming into practice week. It was pretty much impossible to get the parts that we needed to stiffen it up a little more. So as far as the suspension goes, we wanted to go with some stiffer springs and a stiffer sway bar. And next year we kind of ran out of time coming into this year. We want to put a sway bar on the rear, and you know, there's a few other modifications that we want to do with our aerodynamics and stuff like that. So we got a little bit of work ahead of us, mainly the engine. We have a spare, but I'm looking to see if I can find something that's going to get us a little bit higher up in horsepower than what we were this year. But yeah, we got quite a few things planned for the off season. I think we're just going to focus on the Bronxzilla running for Pikes Peak next year if we get accepted in again, and then go from there.
That's going to be awesome. And you're saying more power on that. Are you thinking anything with maybe forced induction, bigger displacement? Any idea? I know it's early, but any ideas so far?
Yeah, I've been tossing both ideas around with forced induction or naturally aspirated, and we have a couple of leads that we're going to pursue. Well, two of them being forced induction, and then one of them being naturally aspirated. And we'll just see how it all plays out, what the best option is going to be for us and fitting it into the Bronco.
Right. And at least it's not a stock Bronco in the sense that you got to, you know, work around the normal engine-based stuff. I think you got maybe a tiny bit more room in there than a stock one.
Yeah, exactly. With that motor being pushed so far back, the one limitation we do have is it pretty much the carburetor right now sits just behind the bottom of the windshield. So we're kind of limited on height right there. We can't go any lower, otherwise the oil pan will be rubbing on the ground, but we can't really go any higher, otherwise we'll be cutting the windshield and doing stuff like that, which I didn't really want to get into. But yeah, I mean, there is a lot of room to improve there.
Awesome. And then I guess maybe, you know, just kind of wrapping things up to, you know, looking back at some of the qualifying days and some of the practice days, you know, overall, how are your impressions of the mountain then, you know, before we got into all this terrible weather? I think when the weather rolled in, and especially when everyone was looking at the forecast the day before, I think everyone kind of knew no records were going to be set this year on the mountain. So, but just looking at some of your runs on practice and qualifying, how did that feel like with the car and getting really up there at full speed?
Oh yeah, it felt good, especially looking back on it, seeing that we were qualified. I think it was 18th overall, somewhere right in there, and that I was super happy. We had a lot of good advice coming from my mentor, Paul Dallenbach, and then Reese Millen helped me out a little bit on some stuff, it was super helpful. And you know, we were really happy with even the whole experience. With everything with Pikes Peak was a lot of fun, and you know, it's kind of hard because even after the week after Pikes Peak, we were having withdrawals from it, like, oh man, we got to get back up there.
That's awesome. Well, and at least you got some of the Colorado Hill Climb Association stuff to hold you over for a little bit until next year, right?
Yeah, exactly. This weekend they're racing in Rangeley. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to make it to that one, but the next race we'll be at is Grand Junction. That's Lands End Road. It's August 6th and 7th, so we'll be there.
Awesome. Yeah, I already am asking for time off so I can make it. I can make it down there, make a weekend trip out of it. I can't wait to go down there, cheer you on, and see you racing that too. And that'll be kind of a return to what you're used to as well, right? Because that's going to be on dirt, if I'm correct.
Yeah, that's kind of where my roots are. I mean, I started out racing when I was 10 years old on the asphalt, but then, you know, the majority of my racing has been on the dirt, and that's kind of where my roots are, at the dirt. So yeah, Lands End is a little over 5-mile course. There's plenty of great spots to watch from, and we're excited to get back there.
Awesome. I can't wait to see it. I can't wait to be out there, see you running that. I really wish you best of luck with that.
Well, thank you, Matt.
Awesome. And thank you for joining me on the show here. It's always fun hearing from you. I hope in the future, too, we can just touch base every now and then on the show. I know a lot of my listeners as well really get a kick out of hearing you talk about the stuff you're doing with again, just the grassroots racing aspect here. I mean, it's true motorsports, I think, at its core.
Yeah, absolutely. I love being on here, and I love talking about the things you do. It's one of my biggest passions is racing, so I love to share that passion with other people too.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Matt.
And now for how things work with an engineer.
Engines. Speed.
And that was how things work with an engineer. For more of how things work, go to patreon.com/throttlewarriors.
Oh yeah, there we go. We are rocking it on the Automotive ADHD show. That car sound is courtesy of listener Brad Stapp. That is his 1964 Mercury Breezeway at the drag strip, racing his buddy in his 1964 Mercury Marauder. 2 hot rods racing at the drag strip. How cool is that? Those Mercuries, by the way, they look incredible. The cars of the 60s, man. Oh my gosh. The styling is just absurd. I love it. Now, that said, if you have car sounds you want to share, you can share those and be entered for a chance to win the Automotive ADHD keychain. I've got one of those sitting here on the desk. It tells your friends you have questionable tastes in podcasts, and it's also a convenient keychain. So, dual purpose item right there. You also get a $25 gift certificate to your favorite parts store. Send those car sounds in to matt@throttlewarrior.com or post them on the Facebook page, facebook.com/automotive ADHD. Now, I don't want to wait any longer getting to my next guest. His name is Alastair Moffatt, and he has 13 Guinness World Records for incredible feats of precision driving. His stunt driving work has been seen on television and movies, having worked as well with the BBC, National Geographic, and countless auto manufacturers. And now he is on my very humble podcast and radio show. Alastair, thank you for joining me on the show.
Hi, Matt. Nice to speak to you here from England.
So before we talk about your records, which are extensive, let's get into your background. As I understand, so you started out in doing a lot of motorsports, but just walk me through a little bit of your background, where you came from, and how that has now transformed over the years to you having 13 current Guinness World Records.
Yeah, so I started really young. I did the normal thing at age of 10, went into go-karts, and then as soon as I could get into an actual car, there's a sport over here called auto testing. I think it's called in the States with you, possibly slaloms, and it incorporates forward and reverse driving against the clock, a start and a finish gate, and you basically got to do cover that ground as fast as possible. And so I entered that when I was at 16 and managed to win the British Championship at that 7 times. And so that's my sort of background with that, and done other stuff, car trials and hill climbs and sprints, and a bit of an all-rounder at sort of anything with a wheel. I'll have a go at trying to drive it as fast or as hard as possible, really. So and then it sort of led into I got asked to do some displays with the auto testing when I was quite young, and moved on from there, really.
Wow, very cool. And here I believe we call that usually, I think, autocross now. And it's you got a big course with a lot of cones, and that's perhaps one of the friendliest ways to start into any sort of performance driving, I would say. It's very cool. I've gone to some of the events here, and I mean, there are kids out there who are 16, so starting out a lot like you did. Now, looking at just a few of your records, tightest forward parallel park, narrowest gap driven on 2 wheels, tightest 360-degree spin in a car, and tightest triple forward parallel park. I triple forward. I'm pretty sure that wasn't on the driving exam when I took it, but what challenge or which record would you say was the most challenging?
The most challenging record that I've done is the narrowest gap driven through on two wheels by two cars. So we had to actually, my brother had to learn how to drive on two wheels. I had previously learned, and we had to get two minis through a gap at exactly the same time on two wheels, and it was so tight. It was just unbelievable. His wheel was in front of my windscreen as we went through the gap. It was that tight. And obviously, it's very easy when a car's on the ground to be that precise. But when you're actually trying to balance something at the same time, you do have an element of sway in the car and how it's reacting. So it was a bit of a synchronized sort of sway of the cars as it went through the gap, and that was by far the hardest challenge I've had to do. So the level of achievement was immense. So.
Wow. And again, it's incredible. And when you look at some of those achievements, and I was just looking through some of the world records you have, and you look at that and you go, how is that even possible? And also, like when you talk to the guys, I'm sure when you call up the folks at Guinness and they go, wait, you're going to do what with the car?
Yeah. So, I mean, very few of the records are new, so they're all current records. So there is guidelines, and they can to actually achieve that record. And like, for example, the forward parallel park. I mean, that is designed originally in the wording for that for parking alongside, pulling alongside a car, and then reversing into the space. And then it moved on that it got so tight that was unachievable. So then they allowed you to have a run up at it and actually handbrake it into the space at about 30 or 40 mile an hour. So that record has been on a world tour. I've lost that record about 3 times to either, there was a couple of guys in China and a guy in Germany were determined to prevent me from actually holding that record for more than about 3 or 4 months. But I got the record down to 7.5 centimeters, which is sort of a cross diagonal of a post-it note, slightly less than that. And that's combined front and rear gap. And that record has stood for the longest it's ever stood for now. So since about 2015, I think it was. So it's got it, with every world record, it gets to the point where, as I said, if you win a world rally championship or Formula One championship or a NASCAR or something like that, you only have to be the best that year. But to do a world record, nobody has ever done it tighter, faster, or harder in the history of that record. So somebody will have to pull out all the stops to try and beat that 7.5 centimeters. It was a big challenge to get it, and they will struggle.
Right. And when you're doing these records as well, or when you're looking for other records, do you see guys who do a record and say, oh, I think I can beat that as well? What's sort of the thought process that goes into when you find a record like that to maybe beat?
I mean, obviously, there's a lot of practice goes into some of them. A two-wheeling is not naturally something that you learn in your driving test or something like that. So to actually achieve some of them, a lot of practice goes into it. The thought process is that I'm as good as anyone else, so why would I not be able to do it better? So and you've got to go into the mindset that that is the case. And I've got quite a good skill set at driving in precision. I wouldn't say I'm necessarily the best at driving at 200 mile an hour around Indy 500. That's not my skill set. Mine is precision and down to the centimeter, down to the millimeter precision driving. So you basically concentrate on what you're good at, and that's what I excel at. So I'll keep on doing those records, and I don't think I'll go for the speed records. I don't think.
I'd say the speed records are a little more hazardous too, in case if you're practicing and heaven forbid something goes wrong. So They're just a tiny bit more hazardous. Now, when you do these records, so sometimes, and I've been watching a bunch of them, sometimes it's at an airstrip with a, television crew and Guinness comes out there, and other times you've done this in front of, in an arena with spectators and people, and, what goes through your mind when you're, behind the wheel? You're behind the wheel of the car, you're ready to go, everyone's rolling, do you ever get the nerves when you're going into it?
Yeah, you do. But the motorsport kicks in then, really. The being able to cope with the pressure and actually still being able to pull off a decent result. That's what motorsport has done the most. A lot of the other people that have done these records have learned a process to actually, the car. If you look at the marks of the car on on stuff on YouTube, the car is. They just drive in, 500 times into a space and get a process down to it. But when it comes to the pressure and actually achieving it, you need to have to step the game up, and the motorsport and that is actually that's the biggest thing that I've taken from that.
Okay, and that's why you're a professional at it as well. Very, very cool. Now, again, my guest is precision driving world record holder Alastair Moffatt. And Alastair, so you also operate a company called Stunt Drive UK. Now, I would assume by the name that it involves stunt driving, but you also told me before before the show here that it was the first stunt driving company of its kind in the UK. What sort of stuff do you guys do?
So we just teach people that just want to come on an experience day or anything from that through to we've taught stuntmen and women from all over the world. So from Australia and China have come to us to learn some of the tricks of the trade, really. So we do handbrake turns, the parallel park, and J turns, and we also have got a classic mini which has got a stabilizer, much the same as you'd have when you were learning how to ride a bike on the side of it. And that allows us to teach the general public how to actually give them the sensation of actually driving a car on two wheels. So the car will go up to over 45 degrees and quite safely because it's got a stabilizer to stop it going over any further. And so it's a great day out, and it's a good fix for any adrenaline junkie that wants to have a go at it, really.
Wow, that is very cool, because that's one thing that I think of when I see precision driving, or when you see the guys on, for instance, television ads, and maybe in a Mercedes commercial swinging a